My husband assaulted me in front of his entire family and no one stood up to him. But my daughter did something that made him turn pale. My name is Amanda, and I need to tell you something that changed everything. 3 years ago, I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. It was Thanksgiving 2021, and I was standing in my own dining room, my cheek burning from the slap that had just echoed through the house. The turkey I'd spent 4 hours preparing sat untouched on the table, surrounded by his family members who were looking at me with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect," his mother said, dabbing her mouth with the cloth napkin I'd ironed that morning. "A woman should know her place." His sister nodded approvingly. "Poor Marcus has been dealing with this attitude for years. We've been telling him he's too patient with you." I stood there, my hand pressed against my stinging cheek, feeling smaller than I ever had in my 32 years. Marcus towered over me, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the mahogany table his mother had insisted we buy with money we didn't have, the same table where I'd served countless meals to people who treated me like hired help. "Sit down and eat," he commanded, his voice still carrying the edge that had preceded the violence. "And maybe think about what you did to deserve that." What had I done? I'd asked his uncle to please not smoke cigars in the house because Lucy had asthma. That was it. That was my crime, worthy of public humiliation. I looked around the table at these people I'd tried so hard to please for 7 years. His father, an insurance salesman who acted like he ran Wall Street. His mother, who'd never worked a day but criticized my every attempt at contributing to our household. His sister Monica, who'd been divorced twice but felt qualified to give marriage advice. His uncle Pete, whose cigar smoke was apparently more important than my daughter's ability to breathe. They were all watching me, waiting to see if I'd crumble completely. I could feel their anticipation, their hunger for my total surrender. Then I heard a small, calm voice from the kitchen doorway. "Daddy, you shouldn't have done that." Lucy stood there, all 52 pounds of her, holding her tablet in her small hands. She looked so tiny in her purple dress, the one I'd bought specially for today, hoping this Thanksgiving would be different. Marcus turned toward his daughter, his face still flushed with anger. "Go to your room, Lucy. Adults are talking." But Lucy didn't move. She looked directly at her father with those dark eyes that were exactly like mine, and spoke with a composure that would have impressed seasoned negotiators. "I recorded everything, Daddy. The hitting, and what everyone said after. I already sent it to Grandpa Jim." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went from red to white in seconds. His mother's fork clattered against her plate. "What did you just say?" Monica whispered. Lucy held up her tablet, and I could see the recording app was still running. "I've been recording you for weeks, Daddy. Grandpa Jim taught me how. He said if anyone ever hurt Mommy, I should make sure there was proof." Marcus lunged toward Lucy, but she stepped back quickly. "I already uploaded everything to the cloud, Daddy. Grandpa Jim has copies now. He's probably already on his way." I watched my 9-year-old daughter, this tiny person I'd been trying so desperately to protect, and realized she'd been protecting me instead. While I'd been suffering in silence, she'd been building a case. His Uncle Pete stood up abruptly. "We should go. Nobody's going anywhere until we figure this out," Marcus snarled, but his voice was shaking now. Lucy looked at her father with pity that seemed far too mature for her age. "Grandpa Jim says men who hit women are cowards. Daddy, he's going to want to have a talk with you. Let me take you back 3 hours before that moment to show you how we got there." It was 2 p.m. and I was standing in my kitchen, methodically basting the 18-pound turkey that would feed the people who despised me. My hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness about the meal, but from the verbal assault I'd endured since dawn. "The stuffing smells burned," Marcus had announced from his recliner, though I knew it wasn't. I'd made this same recipe for 7 years, perfecting it each time, hoping someday it would earn me a single compliment. "I'll check it again," I'd replied, keeping my voice level. Experience had taught me that any hint of defensiveness would trigger an escalation. Lucy sat at the kitchen island, supposedly doing homework, but actually watching me with those perceptive eyes. At 9, she'd developed an unsettling ability to read the emotional temperature of our house. She knew that when Daddy's voice carried that particular edge, when Mommy's shoulders tensed in that specific way, trouble was coming. "Mama," she whispered when Marcus went upstairs to shower, "your face is doing that thing again." I touched my jaw, realizing I'd been clenching it so tightly my teeth ached. "What thing, baby?" "The scared thing, like when you're trying not to cry." I knelt beside her chair, smoothing her dark hair that was so much like my own. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. Big dinners are a lot of work." But Lucy wasn't buying it. She'd inherited my intuition along with my eyes, and at 9, She was already more emotionally intelligent than her father would ever be. "He's going to be mean to you today," she said matter-of-factly, coloring in her math worksheet with purple crayon. "Grandma Patricia called this morning. I heard her say you better not embarrass the family." My heart sank. I'd hoped Marcus's mother would skip this year, maybe visit Monica instead. But Patricia never missed an opportunity to remind me of my inadequacies in front of an audience. "Lucy, you don't need to worry about grown-up stuff," I said. Though we both knew she'd been worrying about grown-up stuff since she was old enough to understand that other daddies didn't make their mommies flinch. Marcus's footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Lucy immediately straightened in her chair, pencil poised over her homework like a shield. We'd both learned to recognize his moods by the sound of his approach. "Why does it smell like something's burning down here?" he demanded, though nothing was burning. "I don't smell anything burning," I said carefully. "Are you calling me a liar, Amanda?" This was the trap, the one I fell into every time despite knowing better. If I agreed with him, I was admitting incompetence. If I disagreed, I was challenging his authority. There was no right answer. "No, Marcus. I'll double-check everything." He walked to the stove and lifted the lid off the green bean casserole, making a show of waving away imaginary smoke. "Jesus Christ, Amanda. My family's going to think I married someone who can't even cook." Lucy's crayon pressed harder against her paper, and I saw her jaw clench the same way mine did. She was learning to carry tension in her little body, preparing for the explosion that might or might not come. "The beans look perfect, Daddy," Lucy said quietly, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus's attention shifted to his daughter. "Did I ask for your opinion?" "No, sir." "Then keep it to yourself." I watched my daughter's face close off, watched her retreat into that careful blankness she'd perfected as a survival mechanism. At 9 years old, she was already an expert at making herself small and invisible when the emotional weather turned dangerous. The doorbell rang and Marcus immediately transformed. His face relaxed into the charming smile he reserved for outsiders, his voice dropping to the warm, reasonable tone that had fooled me when we first met. "That must be Mom and Dad," he said, kissing my forehead like a loving husband. "You look beautiful, honey." I almost laughed at the performance. In the span of 30 seconds, he'd morphed from my tormentor into my devoted partner, ready to play the role of the perfect son-in-law. Lucy watched this transformation with clinical interest, and I realized she was studying him, learning his patterns, cataloging his behaviors like a tiny anthropologist documenting a dangerous species. "Mama," she whispered as Marcus went to answer the door, "do you want me to stay close to you today?" My 9-year-old daughter was offering to be my bodyguard, and the terrible thing was, I almost said yes. They came through my front door like a conquering army, armed with cutting remarks disguised as concern and criticism, wrapped in false affection. Patricia, Marcus's mother, swept in wearing her favorite weapon, a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She air-kissed my cheeks while scanning my appearance with the thoroughness of a building inspector looking for code violations. "Amanda, dear," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You look tired. Are you sleeping enough?" It was her opening move, disguised as maternal concern, but designed to plant the seed that I looked haggard, worn down, insufficient for her precious son. Marcus's father, Robert, followed behind her, already reaching for his phone to check the stock market, because apparently even Thanksgiving couldn't compete with his portfolio's performance. He managed a grunt of acknowledgement in my direction before settling into what had become his chair in my living room, but it was Monica who brought the real artillery. Marcus's 35-year-old sister had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, and she deployed her first strike before she'd even removed her coat. "Oh, Amanda, you kept the same hairstyle. How consistent of you. I just got mine done at that new salon in downtown. You know, the expensive one. It's amazing what a good cut can do for a woman's confidence." Lucy appeared beside me, pressing against my legs like she was trying to shield me with her small body. Monica noticed and smiled the way people smile when they see something pathetic trying to be brave. "And here's our little Lucy. My goodness, child, you've gotten so serious looking. Are you eating enough? You seem thin." Within 5 minutes, Monica had criticized my parenting by implying I wasn't feeding my daughter properly. It was masterful in its efficiency. Uncle Pete wandered in last, already lighting a cigar despite the fact that we were indoors and Lucy had asthma. When I'd married Marcus, Pete had seemed like the fun uncle, full of stories and laughter. But 7 years had shown me he was just another man who believed his comfort mattered more than everyone else's well-being. "Amanda, sweetheart," Patricia said, settling herself at the head of my dining table like a queen claiming her throne. "I ran into Janet Morrison at the country club last week. You remember Janet? Her daughter Melissa married that successful attorney? Well, Melissa just bought the most beautiful house in Riverside Estates. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, granite countertops throughout. I knew where this was going. Patricia loved to regale me with tales of other women's successes, always with the implicit message that I was holding Marcus back from similar achievements. That sounds lovely, I managed, retrieving serving spoons from the kitchen. It really is, Patricia continued, her voice carrying across the house. Of course, Melissa has such a head for business. She's been helping her husband's practice, really supporting his career instead of, she gestured vaguely around my modest home. Well, instead of whatever this is supposed to be. Monica picked up the thread seamlessly. Melissa always was the smart one in their friend group. Remember how she got her real estate license? Now she's making more money than some of the men in town. It's so inspiring to see a woman who really applies herself. I was being dissected by experts, my inadequacies laid bare with surgical precision. The message was clear. Other wives were assets to their husbands, while I was dead weight. Lucy had disappeared into her room claiming she needed to finish homework. I envied her escape route. Amanda, dear. Robert finally looked up from his phone. Marcus tells me you've been talking about going back to school again. Nursing, wasn't it? My heart jumped. Marcus had promised to discuss my career plans privately with his parents, to maybe get their support for what would be a significant family investment. Yes, I said carefully. I've always wanted to help people. And with Lucy getting older, I thought, at your age? Patricia interrupted with a laugh that wasn't quite cruel enough to call her out on, but wasn't kind either. Darling, nursing school is so demanding. All those young girls with their energy and, well, their advantages. Wouldn't your time be better spent focusing on what you have here? Monica nodded sagely. Plus the cost. Marcus works so hard already. It seems selfish to add that kind of financial burden when you could just, I don't know, maybe get a part-time job at a retail store or something. They were destroying my dreams with the efficiency of a demolition crew, making it sound like practicality instead of cruelty. Besides, Patricia added, Lucy needs her mother home. Children from broken schedules often develop problems. Look at the Morrison boy. Brilliant child, but his mother worked too much during his formative years, and now he's in therapy. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller with each word, until I was nothing but a collection of failures and poor decisions. Marcus watched it all with the satisfied expression of a man whose family was doing his dirty work for him. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as family conversation. I'd outdone myself with the meal. The turkey was perfectly golden, the stuffing was moist but not soggy, and the cranberry sauce had just the right balance of tart and sweet. But perfection had never been enough to earn me peace in this house. This turkey is a little dry, Patricia announced after her first bite, though I could see the juice running down her fork. I think it's delicious, Lucy said quietly, her small act of rebellion earning her a sharp look from her grandmother. Children don't really have developed palates, dear, Patricia replied with false patience. Amanda, you might try brining next time. Melissa Morrison's turkey is always so moist. She uses some special technique she learned from a cooking class. There it was again, the comparison to the mythical Melissa, perfect wife and daughter-in-law, who apparently excelled at everything I failed to do adequately. Monica picked up the torch. Speaking of classes, didn't you say you wanted to take some? What was it again? Nursing? She said the word like it tasted bad. I mentioned it, I said carefully, aware that Marcus was watching me with warning eyes. How exactly would that work? Robert asked, his tone suggesting he already knew it wouldn't. With Marcus's schedule and Lucy's needs? Seems pretty selfish to abandon your family responsibilities for some fantasy career. It's not a fantasy, I said, and immediately regretted the defensive edge in my voice. The table fell silent. I'd crossed a line by contradicting the family patriarch. Monica laughed, breaking the tension. Oh, Amanda, you always were a dreamer. Remember when you wanted to go back to school after Lucy was born? And that time you talked about starting a catering business? You have so many ideas, but follow-through has never been your strong suit. Each word was a carefully placed knife, cutting away at my confidence with surgical precision. They'd turned my hopes into evidence of my instability, my dreams into proof of my inadequacy. Maybe we should focus on being grateful for what we have, Marcus said, his voice carrying that dangerous undertone I knew too well. Uncle Pete, who'd been steadily working through a bottle of wine while smoking his cigars, decided to join the conversation. You know what your problem is, Amanda. You don't appreciate what you've got. Marcus works his ass off, pardon the language, to provide for this family. And instead of being thankful, You're always wanting more. I just want to contribute, I began. Contribute? Pete's voice rose. You think raising a child and keeping house isn't contributing? What's wrong with women these days? My generation understood what marriage meant. Lucy had stopped eating, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth as she watched the adults tear apart her mother's character. Maybe Amanda feels unfulfilled because she doesn't put enough effort into what she already has, Patricia suggested with false compassion. A happy wife finds joy in her husband's success, in her child's well-being. When we're constantly reaching for more, we miss the blessings right in front of us. They were suffocating me with their twisted logic, making my desire for education and purpose sound like ingratitude and selfishness. Monica delivered the final blow. Besides, Amanda, let's be honest. You're 32. Even if you did finish nursing school, you'd be competing with girls who are 22 and don't have all the complications of family life. It's just not realistic. Something inside me snapped. Not the explosive kind of snap that leads to dramatic confrontations, but the quiet kind that happens when you finally see clearly through years of carefully constructed gaslighting. You know what? I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I'm 32, not 92, and maybe those 22-year-olds don't have my life experience, my motivation, or my understanding of what really matters. The silence that followed was arctic. Marcus's face flushed red. Amanda. His voice carried a warning that anyone else would have heeded. But I was done being warned, done being silenced, done being made small by people who needed me diminished to feel powerful. No, Marcus. I'm tired of apologizing for having ambitions. I'm tired of pretending that wanting more than this makes me ungrateful. That's when he hit me. The slap echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, and for a moment, everyone froze. Then Patricia smiled, actually smiled, and nodded approvingly. Finally, she murmured, a woman needs boundaries. Let me tell you about Mrs. Stanley, Lucy's third-grade teacher, and how a simple school project became the key to our freedom. It was October, about a month before that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. Lucy had come home from school carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read, serious but not troubled, like she was processing something important. Mama, I need help with a project, she announced, settling at the kitchen table where she always did her homework. I was folding laundry, grateful for a peaceful moment while Marcus was still at work. These quiet hours between Lucy's return from school and Marcus's arrival home had become precious to me, the only time I could breathe freely in my own house. What kind of project, baby? Lucy opened her folder and pulled out a worksheet titled Family Dynamic Study. My stomach clenched instinctively, though I couldn't have explained why. Mrs. Stanley says we need to observe and document how families communicate and solve problems, Lucy explained, reading directly from the instruction sheet. We have to record interactions between family members for 2 weeks and then write a report about what we learned. I sat down beside her, scanning the assignment. It seemed innocent enough, asking children to notice patterns in how their families functioned, to identify communication styles, to observe conflict resolution methods. Mrs. Stanley says some families are really good at talking through disagreements, and some families have different approaches, Lucy continued, her 9-year-old brain clearly working through concepts that were more complex than typical third-grade material. What exactly does she want you to record? I asked, though part of me already suspected where this was heading. Lucy flipped to the next page, which contained detailed instructions about documentation methods. Students could write journals, create charts, or even use technology like tablets or phones to record family conversations. With permission, of course. She says it's important to capture real interactions, not just what we think happens, Lucy said, her dark eyes meeting mine. Sometimes families don't realize their own patterns until someone outside points them out. I felt a chill run down my spine. Mrs. Stanley had been Lucy's teacher for 2 months, and she'd struck me as unusually perceptive during our parent-teacher conference. She'd asked careful questions about Lucy's home life, noting that my daughter seemed hypervigilant and unusually mature for her age. Did Mrs. Stanley say anything else about this project? I asked. Lucy nodded. She said some kids might discover things about their families that surprise them, and if anyone feels unsafe or uncomfortable with what they observe, they should talk to her privately. The woman was brilliant. Without directly asking children to report abuse, she'd created a legitimate academic framework for them to document and seek help for unhealthy family situations. She also said we can share our recordings with other family members if we want to, Lucy added. Like if we want to show our observations to grandparents or aunts and uncles who might be interested in family patterns. I stared at my daughter. This wise little person who seemed to understand the implications of this assignment better than most adults would. Lucy, I said carefully, you know Daddy sometimes gets frustrated when he's tired from work, right? She nodded solemnly. I know, Mama. Mrs. Stanley says all families have stress, but healthy families find ways to manage it without hurting each other. Without hurting each other. The phrase hung in the air between us like a revelation. Would you like me to help you with this project? I offered, though I wasn't sure I was ready for what we might discover. Lucy's face lit up with something I hadn't seen in months. Genuine excitement mixed with hope. Yes. Mrs. Stanley says the most important thing is being honest about what we see, even if it's uncomfortable. That afternoon, while Marcus was still at work, Lucy and I set up her documentation system. She decided to use her tablet to record interactions, with backup notes in a composition journal. We practiced with harmless conversations, discussing homework, planning weekend activities, talking about her day at school. But even in these innocent moments, I noticed patterns I'd never consciously acknowledged. How my voice automatically became smaller and more careful when we heard Marcus's car in the driveway. How Lucy instinctively moved closer to me when his footsteps approached. How both of us unconsciously braced for criticism or conflict. Mama, Lucy said as we finished setting up her observation materials, Grandpa Jim called yesterday when you were at the store. My father had been checking in more frequently lately, though he lived 3 states away. A retired Army colonel, he had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong with his family. What did you two talk about? Lucy looked at me with those old eyes in her young face. I asked him a hypothetical question. What kind of hypothetical question? I asked him what he would do if someone was hurting you. 2 weeks after Lucy began her school project, she asked me to sit with her in her bedroom after dinner. Marcus was downstairs watching television, his mood relatively stable after a good day at work, which meant we could speak freely without risk. Lucy closed her bedroom door and pulled out a small wooden box she kept on her bookshelf. The same box where she stored her most treasured possessions. Ticket stubs from our rare mother-daughter movie dates, birthday cards from my father, and a photo of us at the beach from 2 summers ago, when she'd convinced Marcus to let us visit my family. Mama, I need to show you something, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone much older than 9. She opened the box and pulled out her tablet, along with a composition notebook filled with her careful 9-year-old handwriting. The sight made my stomach clench with a mixture of pride and terror. I've been recording everything, just like Mrs. Stanley taught us, Lucy said, settling cross-legged on her purple bedspread. But I haven't just been recording for school. She opened the tablet and showed me a folder labeled Family Observations. Inside were dozens of audio files, each one dated and time-stamped with frightening precision. Lucy, honey, what is all this? Evidence, she said simply, with the matter-of-fact tone she'd inherited from my military father. Mrs. Stanley says that when people do bad things, it's important to have proof so the right people can help. With small fingers that shook only slightly, she opened her composition notebook and showed me pages of meticulous documentation. Dates, times, descriptions of incidents, and her emotional responses to what she'd witnessed. October 15th, 6:30 p.m. Daddy yelled at Mama about dinner being late. Mama apologized even though she was only 5 minutes late. Daddy called her stupid. Mama's hands shook when she served his plate. October 18th, 7:45 a.m. Daddy said Mama's hair looked like a bird's nest and asked why she couldn't try to look decent. Mama went to the bathroom and I heard her crying. October 22nd, 8:20 p.m. Daddy grabbed Mama's arm when she tried to leave the room during an argument. Left marks. Mama wore long sleeves the next day. Lucy, I whispered, my heart breaking as I read her careful documentation of my humiliation. Baby, why didn't you tell me you were doing this? Because I knew you'd try to stop me, she said with devastating honesty. And because Mrs. Stanley says adults sometimes can't see their own situations clearly when they're scared. She was right, and her clarity was both impressive and heartbreaking. My 9-year-old daughter had recognized what I'd been unable to admit to myself, that we were living in a situation that required documentation, evidence, and outside intervention. I called Grandpa Jim again yesterday, she continued, and I asked him another hypothetical question. What did you ask him this time? I asked him if he'd want to know if someone was hurting his daughter and granddaughter, even if his daughter was too scared to tell him herself, my father. Of course she'd thought of him, Colonel James Mitchell, who'd spent 30 years in the Army and had very specific opinions about men who hurt women, the same man who'd taught me to shoot when I was 12 and had made it clear that any boy who wanted to date me would have to meet his standards first. What did Grandpa say? Lucy's face grew serious. He said any man who hurts his family is a coward and a criminal. He said if someone was hurting us, he'd want proof so he could make sure it stopped forever. Lucy, sweetheart, this is a very grown-up situation. Mama, I'm already living in a grown-up situation, she interrupted, her voice steady but sad. I've been tiptoeing around Daddy's moods since I was little. I've been watching him hurt you and learning to be quiet so he won't hurt me too. I'm already grown up in all the ways that matter. She was right, and the truth of it cut through me like a blade. She pulled out another notebook. This one's smaller and bound with a rubber band. I also made copies of everything and hid them in different places. One set is in my locker at school, one is with Mrs. Stanley, and one is uploaded to an email account that only Grandpa Jim and I know about. My 9-year-old had created a comprehensive evidence preservation system that would impress federal investigators. Lucy, what's your plan with all this? She looked at me with eyes that held both love and determination. I'm waiting for the right moment, Mama. When Daddy does something really bad in front of witnesses, when there's no way for anyone to pretend it didn't happen or wasn't that serious. And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. And I'm going to make sure Grandpa Jim can protect us the way he's always wanted to. My father had always been perceptive, but Lucy's phone call the next evening took his awareness to a whole new level. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard her talking quietly in the living room. Marcus was working late again, which had become more common as his frustration with life at home intensified. Hi, Grandpa Jim, Lucy said, her voice carrying that careful neutrality she'd perfected for difficult conversations. I wanted to ask you something for my school project about families. I moved closer to the doorway, pretending to organize the mail while listening to my daughter's half of the conversation. Well, I'm supposed to learn about how different families solve problems, she continued. So I was wondering, if someone in a family was being mean to someone else, like really mean, what would you do? There was a long pause as my father responded. I could imagine his face, the way his jaw tightened when he sensed trouble brewing around the people he loved. But what if the person being mean was bigger and stronger? Lucy asked. And what if the person being hurt was too scared to ask for help? Another pause. Lucy was walking a tightrope, gathering information while maintaining the pretense that this was academic curiosity. Hypothetically, she said, using a word that seemed too sophisticated for a 9-year-old, but fit perfectly with her precocious intelligence. If someone was hurting you and Mama, would you want to know? Even if we didn't tell you directly? I had to grip the door frame to keep from sinking to my knees. My daughter was reaching out to her grandfather, creating a bridge between our isolation and the help we desperately needed. Okay, Lucy said, her voice brightening slightly. And if someone did want to tell you about something bad happening, how would they do it? Like, what kind of proof would help you understand? The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Lucy asking increasingly specific questions disguised as academic curiosity. By the time she hung up, she'd essentially created an instruction manual for reporting domestic abuse to a retired military officer. Mama, she called softly, can you come here? I found her sitting on the couch, looking simultaneously like a little girl and like someone carrying the weight of adult responsibilities. Grandpa Jim wants to talk to you, she said, handing me the phone. My father's voice was gentle, but carried an edge I recognized from my childhood, the tone he used when he was preparing for battle. Amanda, sweetheart, Lucy's been asking some very interesting questions about family dynamics. Has she? I tried to keep my voice light, but my father had known me for 32 years. Questions that sound less like school curiosity and more like someone trying to figure out how to report a serious problem. The silence stretched between us across 3 states and 7 years of carefully maintained lies. Dad, everything's fine here. Lucy just takes her schoolwork very seriously and… Amanda. His voice was quiet but firm. I didn't spend 30 years in the army without learning to read between the lines. And I didn't raise you to lie to me when you're in trouble. I could feel tears threatening, the relief of being truly heard after years of being dismissed and minimized. If someone is hurting you or Lucy, I need to know. And if you can't tell me directly, then I need you to understand that there are other ways to communicate. Other ways? Lucy mentioned this school project involves documentation, recording family interactions. If someone were to share those recordings with me, I'd know exactly what to do with them. My father was giving me permission to ask for help without having to find the courage to ask directly. He was creating a safety net for both Lucy and me. Dad, I whispered, what if it's complicated? What if leaving isn't simple? Honey, I've seen complicated. I've handled complicated. What I can't handle is knowing my daughter and granddaughter are in danger. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, matching the dread that had settled in my chest like a stone. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., not because I needed the extra time to prepare, but because sleep had become impossible when I knew what was coming. Lucy found me in the kitchen at 5:30, already dressed in her purple dress and moving with the quiet efficiency of someone executing a carefully planned mission. "Morning, Mama," she said, kissing my cheek before settling at the kitchen island with her tablet and a glass of orange juice. "You're up early, baby." "I wanted to make sure everything was ready," she said, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. She had the focused calm of my father before he deployed, that particular stillness that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done and being prepared to do it. "Lucy, are you okay?" She looked up from her tablet, where I could see she was reviewing files in her family observations folder. "I'm ready, Mama. Are you?" I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for what this day might bring, but looking at my 9-year-old daughter's determined face, I realized readiness wasn't the point. Sometimes survival required action regardless of readiness. Marcus appeared in the kitchen at 7 a.m., already dressed in his good shirt and carrying the particular energy that preceded family gatherings. A mixture of performance anxiety and preemptive defensiveness that made him more volatile than usual. "The house better be spotless when they get here," he announced, pouring coffee with more force than necessary. "And I don't want any of your attitude today, Amanda. My family doesn't need to see you sulking." I was learning to recognize these preemptive strikes, ways of establishing dominance before the audience arrived, setting the emotional tone that would justify whatever came later. "Everything's under control," I said, keeping my voice neutral while checking the turkey one more time. Lucy watched this exchange with those observant eyes, her tablet positioned discreetly on the counter. I wondered if she was recording already, building her final collection of evidence. "Lucy, go get dressed properly," Marcus commanded, though she was already dressed perfectly. "And brush your hair. You look like you stuck your finger in a light socket." "Yes, Daddy," Lucy replied without argument, but I saw her jaw tighten the same way mine did when swallowing insults. As she walked past me toward the stairs, she whispered, "It's almost time, Mama." The morning passed in a blur of final preparations and mounting tension. Marcus found fault with everything: the way I'd arranged the silverware, the temperature of the house, the fact that I'd chosen to wear my navy dress instead of the black one his mother preferred. Each criticism was carefully cataloged by Lucy, who had positioned herself strategically throughout the house. Her tablet always within reach, always recording. At 11 a.m., she approached me while Marcus was in the shower. "Mama, I need to send something to Grandpa Jim before everyone gets here." "What do you need to send?" "Everything," she said simply. "All the recordings from the past month plus the special ones from this morning. Grandpa Jim said timing is important in military operations." I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 9-year-old. "Lucy, once you send those files, there's no taking them back. Everything changes after that." She nodded solemnly. "I know, Mama, but keeping secrets about bad things doesn't make them stop. It just makes them worse." With steady fingers, she composed an email to my father. The subject line read, "Family Project, Final Documentation." The message was brief. "Grandpa Jim, here are all my observations for my school project about family communication. I think you'll find them very educational. Love, Lucy. P.S. We might need that help we talked about soon." She hit send at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Marcus's family was due to arrive. "It's done," she announced, closing her tablet and looking at me with a mixture of relief and determination. Now we wait for the right moment. The silence that followed Lucy's announcement stretched like a held breath. Marcus's family sat frozen around my dining table, their faces cycling through disbelief, panic, and fury. Marcus himself had gone completely white, his hand still raised from where he'd struck me moments before. The confident patriarch who'd been terrorizing his family suddenly looked like a frightened child who'd been caught breaking something valuable. "What exactly did you send your grandfather?" Patricia asked, her voice barely controlled. The superior smile had vanished, replaced by the sharp calculation of someone assessing damage. Lucy looked at her grandmother with the same clinical detachment she'd shown her father. "Everything, Grandma Patricia. All the recordings of Daddy hurting Mama. All the times he called her stupid or grabbed her or made her cry. Plus what just happened here." Monica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Marcus, tell me she's making this up. Tell me you haven't been—" "I haven't been anything!" Marcus exploded, but his voice cracked on the lie. "This is insane! She's 9 years old! Who's going to believe—" "Grandpa Jim will," Lucy interrupted calmly. "Especially since I have dates, times, and recordings. Mrs. Stanley taught us that good documentation makes truth easy to verify. Uncle Pete, who'd been steadily drinking throughout dinner, slammed his wine glass down hard enough to slosh red wine across the white tablecloth. Jesus Christ, Marcus. What have you done? I haven't done anything that wasn't... Marcus started, then stopped, realizing that any justification would be an admission. Patricia had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Lucy, sweetheart, families have disagreements sometimes. That doesn't mean... Grandma, I have recordings of Daddy calling Mama worthless. Stupid and a waste of space, Lucy said matter-of-factly. I have him threatening to take me away from her if she didn't learn to behave. I have him grabbing her hard enough to leave bruises. Mrs. Stanley says those aren't disagreements. She says those are crimes. The word crimes hit the table like a physical blow. Robert, who'd been frantically scrolling through his phone, looked up with the expression of a man calculating financial ruin. Do you have any idea what this could do to the family reputation? He hissed at Marcus. To the business? Marcus lunged toward Lucy, but she'd positioned herself strategically near the kitchen doorway and stepped back quickly. The recordings are already uploaded to the cloud, Daddy. Grandpa Jim has copies and Mrs. Stanley has copies, and I sent some to myself at 3 different email addresses. Even if you broke my tablet, they'd still exist. My 9-year-old daughter had outmaneuvered a room full of adults with the strategic thinking of a seasoned prosecutor. Monica turned on me with vicious desperation. This is your fault, Amanda. You turned her against her own family. What kind of mother? The kind who documents abuse so her daughter doesn't grow up thinking it's normal, Lucy answered before I could speak. Grandpa Jim says children who witness violence often become violent themselves unless someone intervenes. Patricia was now pacing behind her chair, her elegant composure completely shattered. We can fix this. We can explain that it was taken out of context, that Marcus was just what? Lucy asked with devastating innocence. Just hitting women? Just making threats? Just teaching me that this is how men treat their families? The front door chimed, and every adult in the room jumped like they'd been electrocuted. Lucy smiled for the first time all day. That's probably Grandpa Jim. I texted him the address after I sent the recordings. He said he was driving straight here from Pennsylvania. Through the front window, I could see my father's familiar silhouette approaching the door, along with 2 other men whose military bearing was unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Marcus looked like he might vomit. Lucy, he said desperately, whatever I did, I'm sorry. We can fix this as a family. We don't need outside... Daddy, Lucy interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. Grandpa Jim says apologies don't count when someone only says sorry after they get caught. The doorbell rang, strong and insistent. Lucy looked around the table at the adults who'd spent the day tearing down her mother, and her expression was pure steel. I think it's time for the grown-ups to have a real conversation about family dynamics. My father filled the doorway like an avenging angel in a pressed shirt and khaki pants. At 62, Colonel James Mitchell still carried himself with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, and the 2 men flanking him had the same unmistakable military presence. Amanda, he said, his voice gentle as his eyes found mine, then hardened to steel as they swept the room. Lucy called and said you might need some assistance with a family discussion. Marcus had shrunk back against the dining room wall, his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of 3 men who looked like they'd handled bigger problems than a small-town bully. Dad, I started, but he held up one hand. I've heard the recordings, sweetheart. All of them. We can talk later. His attention fixed on Marcus with laser precision. Right now, I think this gentleman and I need to have a conversation outside. This is my house, Marcus stammered, trying to summon authority he no longer possessed. And these are my daughter and granddaughter, my father replied with the quiet certainty of a man stating natural law. Gentlemen, would you mind joining us in the backyard? I think some fresh air might help clarify everyone's thinking. The 2 men with him, who I later learned were retired military police and longtime family friends, stepped forward with the coordinated movement of people who'd worked together before. This is kidnapping, Patricia shrieked, but her voice carried no real conviction. Ma'am, we're just facilitating a discussion between men, one of my father's companions said politely. Sometimes these conversations require privacy to be fully productive. Marcus looked around the room desperately, seeking support from his family, but they'd all discovered urgent interest in their plates. Their phones, anything but meeting his eyes. Marcus, my father said, his tone conversational but carrying absolute authority. We can do this easy or we can do it hard, but we're going to do it. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned to the dining room looking like he'd been through a washing machine. His shirt was dirty, there was grass in his hair, and he was walking with the careful gait of someone who'd recently learned some hard lessons about physics. My father and his friends followed, looking perfectly composed except for my father's slightly scuffed knuckles. Marcus has some things he'd like to discuss with everyone, my father announced pleasantly. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice noticeably hoarse. I'm going to be moving out, tonight, and I'll be signing divorce papers, with a very generous settlement for Amanda and Lucy. How generous? Robert asked sharply, his accountant's instincts kicking in despite the circumstances. One of my father's companions pulled out a manila folder and handed it to Marcus, who opened it with shaking hands. The house is Amanda's. Free and clear, Marcus read in a voice barely above a whisper. Full custody of Lucy to Amanda, with supervised visitation only after completion of court-mandated counseling. Monthly support payments of $4,000 until Lucy turns 18, Patricia gasped. $4,000? That's fair compensation for 7 years of unpaid labor and psychological abuse. My father finished calmly. Plus, there's a clause about Lucy's college fund. Marcus will be contributing $25,000 annually until she graduates. Marcus continued reading with the enthusiasm of a man reading his own execution warrant. I waive any claim to retirement accounts, savings, or other assets. I agree to attend anger management and domestic violence counseling. I acknowledge that any violation of these terms or any contact with Amanda or Lucy outside of supervised visitation will result in... He trailed off, apparently unwilling to finish the sentence. Will result in what? Monica demanded. My father smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. Let's just say Marcus and I have reached an understanding about the consequences of future bad behavior. Uncle Pete, whose cigar had gone out during the outdoor discussion, was staring at Marcus with something approaching respect for the first time I'd ever witnessed. Jesus, Marcus, just sign it, he muttered. Cut your losses. Marcus looked around the table one more time, searching for allies who were no longer there. His family had already begun the process of distancing themselves from him, protecting their own interests now that his behavior had become a liability instead of an amusing character flaw. I'll need a pen, he said quietly. Lucy, who'd been watching the entire proceeding with the fascination of someone seeing justice served in real time, handed her father a purple crayon from her school supplies. Use this, Daddy, she said with perfect innocence. It's the same color as my dress. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, Lucy and I were sitting in our kitchen now, reviewing acceptance letters from 3 different nursing programs. The house felt completely different without Marcus's oppressive presence. Colors seemed brighter, sounds seemed softer, and for the first time in years I could breathe freely in my own home. We'd redecorated Lucy's room in shades of purple and silver, and I'd turned Marcus's former man cave into a study space where I could do my coursework. I think you should choose Metropolitan Community College, Lucy said, spreading the brochures across the kitchen table with the same methodical attention she'd given to documenting our old life. Their clinical rotation program has the best hospital partnerships. At 10 years old, my daughter had become my most trusted advisor, though she was finally acting more like a child and less like a tiny war strategist. How do you know about clinical rotations? I asked, marveling at her research skills. I called and asked. I told them my mom was applying and I wanted to make sure she picked the best program. She grinned. The admissions counselor thought I was really mature for my age. I was starting classes in the fall, using the generous divorce settlement to finally pursue the dream that had been deferred for so long. Marcus's monthly payments, combined with my part-time job at a local clinic, meant we could live comfortably while I focused on my education. The transformation in both of us had been remarkable. Lucy had blossomed into a confident, curious child who no longer flinched at raised voices or watched doorways for signs of danger. Her teacher, Mrs. Stanley, had become not just an educator, but a family friend, checking in regularly and celebrating each milestone in our recovery. Mom, Lucy said, using the more grown-up title she'd recently adopted, I got a letter today, too. She handed me an official-looking envelope addressed to Lucy Mitchell Henderson. Inside was a certificate of recognition from the County Child Protection Services, acknowledging her courage and initiative in protecting family safety. They want me to speak at a conference for teachers and social workers, she explained, about recognizing signs of domestic violence and how to help kids document unsafe situations. My brave girl was turning her traumatic experience into a tool for helping others. The strength she'd shown during our darkest times was now being channeled into advocacy and education. The doorbell rang, and Lucy jumped up to answer it. Through the window, I could see Marcus's sedan parked at the curb, His supervised visitation day. The court-mandated counseling had begun to show some effects. Marcus was more subdued now, careful with his words and movements around Lucy. The swagger and entitlement had been replaced by something approaching humility, though I suspected it was born more from fear of consequences than genuine remorse. "Hi, Daddy," Lucy said politely as she opened the door. Their relationship was civil but distant now, like acquaintances maintaining necessary pleasantries. "Hello, Lucy. Are you ready for our afternoon together?" She nodded and grabbed her backpack, which I knew contained her phone with GPS tracking and emergency contacts programmed in. Trust would be a long time coming, if it ever came at all. "I'll have her back by 6, Marcus said to me, his tone respectful in a way it had never been during our marriage. After they left, I sat in the quiet house reviewing my nursing school materials. The prerequisites I'd needed to complete had been challenging, but manageable, and I'd surprised myself by earning A's in anatomy, chemistry, and psychology. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "How's my college girl doing today?" Dad had stayed for 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, helping us transition and making sure Marcus understood the permanence of the new arrangements. He'd connected us with excellent legal representation, helped us install a security system, and made it clear to everyone in town that his daughter and granddaughter were under his protection. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Marcus's family, faced with the reality of documented abuse and potential criminal charges, had pressured him to accept the divorce terms without contest. They distanced themselves from the situation completely, and we hadn't heard from any of them since the papers were signed. I texted back, "Starting clinical rotations next month. Your granddaughter helped me pick the best program." His response was immediate. "That girl's going to run the world someday, just like her mother." For the first time in 7 years, I was beginning to believe that might be true. 3 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I'm sitting in my graduation cap and gown, watching Lucy beam with pride from the audience as I cross the stage to receive my nursing degree. At 12, she's grown into a poised young woman who carries herself with the confidence of someone who knows she can handle whatever life throws at her. The wooden box where she once stored her evidence now holds different treasures: awards from school, photos from our travels to visit my father, and letters from other children who've reached out after hearing her speak at conferences. But she still keeps those original recordings, stored securely in multiple locations. "Just in case," she tells me when I ask why she maintains such detailed backup systems. And because other kids need to know that documentation works, that adults will listen if you have proof. She's become something of a legend in child advocacy circles, the 9-year-old who outsmarted a room full of abusive adults and created a blueprint for other children in similar situations. Schools now invite her to train teachers on recognizing signs of domestic violence, and she speaks with the authority of someone who's lived through the unthinkable and emerged stronger. Marcus fulfilled his legal obligations for exactly 18 months before violating the restraint order. He'd been drinking, a problem that had worsened after his family disowned him, and decided to confront me at the hospital where I was doing my clinical rotations. Security cameras captured everything, and my father's friends ensured he understood that his second chance had been his last chance. He served 2 years in prison and moved to another state after his release. His support payments now come through a court-administered account, and we haven't seen him since Lucy's 10th birthday, when he sent a card she threw away unopened. His family scattered like leaves after the scandal. Patricia moved to Florida to live with her sister, claiming the stress had damaged her health. Monica remarried and moved to California, desperate to distance herself from the family name. Uncle Pete died of a heart attack a year later, and Robert's insurance business never recovered from the reputational damage. The house that once felt like a prison has become our sanctuary. Lucy and I host study groups here now. She for her accelerated academic program, me for my nursing board certification prep. The dining room where I was humiliated now echoes with laughter and animated discussions about literature, science, and Lucy's newest passion, law. "I want to be a prosecutor," she announced recently. "Specifically, I want to handle domestic violence cases." She's already volunteering with the county attorney's office, helping them understand how to interview child witnesses and collect digital evidence. At 12, she's more technologically sophisticated than most adults, and she uses those skills to help other children document unsafe situations. Mrs. Stanley, now retired, stops by regularly for tea and updates on our lives. She takes quiet pride in the role her family dynamics assignment played in our liberation, though she's careful not to take credit for Lucy's remarkable courage and strategic thinking. "Some children are born with an innate sense of justice," she told me recently. "Lucy just needed the tools to act on it." My father visits every few months, still protective but no longer worried. He's proud of the woman I've become, the nurse who specializes in trauma care, the mother who raised a daughter capable of changing the world, the person who transformed victimization into purpose. You know, Lucy said to me yesterday as we reviewed college brochures. Yes, college brochures, for a 12-year-old who's been accepted into a prestigious early admission program. I used to be angry that Daddy put us through all that. And now? She considered the question with the thoughtfulness that has always made her seem older than her years. Now I think maybe it was necessary. Not because we deserved it, but because surviving it made us who we are. And who we are helps other people. That's my daughter's legacy. Not just her own escape from an impossible situation, but her commitment to ensuring other children don't have to endure what she endured. She's turned her childhood trauma into a superpower, her survival skills into advocacy tools. As for me, I'm a registered nurse now, working in pediatric emergency care where I help other families navigate their darkest moments. I see Lucy's influence in every case I handle, her voice in every safety plan I help create. We're not the same people we were that Thanksgiving morning when everything changed. We're stronger, wiser, and utterly unashamed of the journey that brought us here. Sometimes Lucy still pulls out her tablet and pretends to record family conversations, but now it's a game, a reminder of how far we've come. The little girl who once documented abuse to save her family is now a young woman documenting success, joy, and the infinite possibility that opens up when you refuse to accept that suffering is your only option. We survived, we thrived, and we're making sure others can do the same. That's how this story ends. Not with revenge, but with transformation. Not with bitterness, but with purpose. Not with silence, but with the knowledge that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can change everything.